Hey guys, tonight we slip through the iron gates of a medieval convent, stone walls slick with dew, candles flickering like nervous thoughts, and somewhere deep inside, the faint sound of chanting that feels too perfect to be entirely pure. You've always wondered what went on behind those quiet doors, haven't you? The ones guarded by silence, secrecy, and the faint whiff of something more human than holy. You're about to find out. You probably won't survive this one, at least, not without raising an eyebrow or two. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across damp cobblestones and into the hush of a medieval convent. The air smells of beeswax and wet linen. Candles tremble beside wooden crucifixes, throwing shadows that dance like whispers. Everything feels sacred, yet oddly secretive, like the building itself is holding its breath. Nuns move silently through the corridors, their habits brushing against stone like soft wings. They speak little, but their eyes, those eyes, carry stories centuries old. You can sense it, beneath the vows of silence and chastity. There's something pulsing, something restless. Not sin exactly, just the human heart, refusing to stay quiet. Daily life here isn't all prayer and peace. A bell rings every few hours, slicing the day into fragments, matins, lauds, vespers. The rhythm of obedience, as if holiness can be measured in bells. Meals are plain, bread, broth, sometimes fish. Talking during meals? Forbidden. You must communicate with looks and gestures, a kind of divine charades. And in this silence, you notice everything, the tremor of a hand, the way one sister's gaze lingers a little too long. Historians still argue whether most convents were strict prisons of faith or quiet refuges for women who simply didn't fit the world outside. For some, it was escape, from forced marriages, poverty, or the chaos of medieval war. For others, it was imprisonment, a life sealed off before it even began. You, wandering these halls, can't decide which feels more tragic. The abbess rules here like a general in linen armor. She manages lands, collects tithes, negotiates with bishops. The world thinks of nuns as powerless, but behind these walls, the abbess might command more influence than a minor lord. A mainstream fact for you, some abbesses in 12th century France could even excommunicate men, a power the church rarely gave women. Not bad for someone who supposedly renounced the world. Still, not every sister entered willingly. Some were given to the convent as infants, dowries of guilt or diplomacy. Picture a father, eager to save his soul or his wallet, handing over his daughter like a tithe. She grows up knowing no other life, repeating Latin she doesn't understand, trusting that obedience equals salvation. But when night falls and the candles go out, she wonders what the world smells like beyond these stone walls. A quirky tidbit: archaeologists once found a nun's skeleton in Germany with blue flecks embedded in her teeth, ultramarine pigment, the same precious mineral used in medieval manuscripts. Turns out she'd been licking her paintbrush to make finer strokes. She wasn't just praying, she was painting the Virgin Mary's robes with crushed gemstones. Even in silence, she left her mark, literally between her teeth. The convent itself is like a living body. The chapel is its heart, the refectory its stomach, and the dormitory its dreams. By day, the sisters copy scripture or tend gardens. By night, they dream of the world beyond the walls. You imagine yourself lying on one of those narrow straw mattresses, the rough wool scratching your skin, trying not to think of anything sinful, and instantly thinking of everything sinful. Once in a while, a visitor comes. A priest, perhaps, offering confession. A noble patron dropping off gifts. The air changes when outsiders enter, like a draft of forbidden air. The sisters lower their eyes, but you can feel their curiosity burning beneath those veils. One joke of the age said nuns could spot a handsome monk by the sound of his sandals. You smile, realizing that humor was their only rebellion. Historians still argue whether these places were truly cut off from temptation. After all, the convent walls were porous, not in stone, but in spirit. Messages found their way in. so did ideas. And sometimes, so did people. You begin to sense that the story of these women isn't about sin or sanctity, it's about survival. Outside, the world calls them brides of Christ. Inside, they're just women trying to make peace with their choices, or their lack of them. One sister hides letters from her brother, another secretly sketches faces from memory. A third stares at the crucifix too long, not out of devotion, but longing, for touch, for warmth, for anything real. You linger near the cloister garden, where herbs grow in neat little squares, mint for headaches, sage for cleansing, rue for repentance. The air hums with bees and prayer. And there, among the leaves, a young nun plucks a rose, pricking her finger. A drop of blood falls onto the petals. She looks at it, smiles faintly, and whispers something you can't hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a secret. That's when you realize, behind every vow of silence lies a story begging to be told. And tonight, you're going to hear them all. You wake to the tolling of the morning bell, its echo bouncing through cloisters like a reminder that even dreams aren't your own here. The air is cold, the kind that smells faintly of stone dust and candle smoke. You rise, bleary-eyed, joining the slow procession of veiled figures moving toward the chapel. Every motion rehearsed, every breath folded neatly into routine. You kneel, and as the chant begins, you can almost feel the vibration of 100 whispered vows rising up like mist. Chastity, poverty, obedience, 3 promises meant to set the soul free. But for the women who lived them, the vows sometimes felt like invisible chains. The vow of chastity, especially, has teeth. It's not just a promise to abstain, it's a surrender of identity. In a world that defines women by their fertility, you're choosing sterility, symbolically dying before your body ever has the chance to bloom. Historians still argue whether this vow empowered women, allowing them to escape marriage and control their own destinies, or whether it was simply another kind of submission. You sense the truth lies somewhere in between, suspended like incense smoke in the rafters. In the dormitory, the sisters sleep in rows of narrow cots. Even their dreams are policed. You've heard stories of abbesses waking at midnight to check for immodest rest, which, in medieval terms, might mean twitching too much under the blanket. You imagine trying to sleep knowing someone's lantern might flare beside your face at any moment. Not exactly the kind of bedtime story that ends with, "And they lived happily ever after." During confession, things grow even more complicated. The church demanded purity, but confession created the perfect paradox. To remain pure, you must describe your impurities, in detail, to a man. Many confessors wrote manuals for priests, outlining common temptations of nuns so they know what to expect. Ironically, those lists became some of the most detailed medieval erotica ever penned. One even warned that some nuns had unholy familiarity with their fellow sisters and advised priests to redirect their affection toward Christ. Easier said than done when the confessor himself sometimes blurred that line. You pass through the scriptorium, the air thick with dust and devotion. A nun bends over her parchment, copying psalms in delicate ink. Her fingers tremble slightly, not from fear, but fatigue. She's been at it since sunrise. Another sister nearby hums softly, her voice threading through the silence like a lullaby no one dares acknowledge. You realize something. The vow of chastity may forbid touch, but it can't stop the body from feeling. So those feelings slip into ink, song, and prayer instead. That's how repression turns into art. A mainstream fact for you: Hildegard of Bingen, a real 12th century abbess, claimed that her visions came directly from God. She wrote soaring music, theological treatises, even descriptions of cosmic orgasms disguised as divine ecstasy. She became one of the Church's greatest mystics, but her language was soaked with sensual imagery. Her God didn't demand denial, he demanded passion of a higher order. You wonder if that's what the vow was truly meant to be, a channel, not a cage. And yet, the human body keeps whispering its own truth. You recall that medieval medicine believed women were more moist and passionate than men, prone to temptation if left idle. Some nuns were ordered to fast or even bleed themselves to cool their humors. You shiver imagining that, spiritual self-control enforced through literal bloodletting. One fringe theory even claimed that too much celibacy could make women sick, their seed turning rancid without release. It's disturbing and oddly scientific, in that medieval way where theology and medicine often shared a bed. You wander into the infirmary, where Sister Agnes tends to a young novice faint from fasting. She murmurs a prayer, but her hands are steady, experienced. Agnes knows the body better than most doctors in town. She knows which herbs calm fever, which ones quiet desire. There's irony in that. A woman sworn to purity spending her days healing what nature itself cannot suppress. Sometimes, desire found other outlets. You hear whispers of sisters writing secret love letters, not to men, but to the divine. Their language burns with yearning. My heart trembles for thee, my beloved. Some historians argue these were pure metaphors for spiritual union. Others, reading between the lines, suspect that metaphor had limits. The mystic Mechthild of Magdeburg once described her soul as a bride lying naked with her lover Christ. You can almost hear her abbess coughing awkwardly in the background. You find yourself smirking, because beneath all the solemn vows, these women were alive. They joked, they gossiped, they questioned. One joke making the rounds among medieval clergy described a nun complaining in confession. "Father, I broke my vow of silence." "How so, my daughter?" "By whispering too much to Brother Thomas." Humor, it seems, was their one safe rebellion. As you move through the convent, the tension between body and soul becomes palpable. You notice how everything, the architecture, the schedules, even the food, is designed to keep the mind busy and the body subdued. But repression only sharpens imagination. And imagination is where the trouble begins. The youngest sisters, just past girlhood, often looked up to older ones as mentors. Those relationships could turn tender, emotional, sometimes dangerously intimate. Historians still argue whether these bonds were sisterly love or coded desire. What's certain is that the convent gave women emotional space the outside world denied them. And sometimes, emotions didn't obey the rules. At dusk, you return to the chapel. The chanting resumes, slower now, deeper. You sit in the back and listen, and suddenly, you understand, chastity isn't just about denying the flesh. It's about transforming longing into devotion. Whether that transformation succeeds or not, well, that's another story. The candles sputter, the scent of wax thickens the air. Somewhere in the shadows, you swear you hear someone crying softly, not from guilt, but from being human in a place that pretends to be beyond humanity. You exhale, realizing that for all its silence, this convent hums with life. And where there's life, there will always be secrets. The night folds in on itself. The chants fade, the candles sigh out one by one, and the convent sinks into that kind of silence that almost hums. You step quietly through the cloisters, your sandals whispering against the stones. Somewhere behind one of these doors, a rule is about to bend. Forbidden visitors. They always find a way in. It starts innocently enough: a priest sent for confession, a messenger delivering supplies, a nobleman checking on his donation. You watch him hand over a purse of coins to the abbess, his ringed fingers lingering just a moment too long. She lowers her eyes, but her tone is smooth, practiced. The exchange is business, or at least, that's the story everyone will tell. But temptation has a way of slipping through keyholes. Some priests found themselves visiting more often than their duties required. Others offered spiritual comfort that strayed into the physical. Historians still argue whether such scandals were rare exceptions or symptoms of a wider hypocrisy. The records, of course, were carefully destroyed, or rewritten to make the guilty conveniently vanish into illness or transfer. You pause near the confessional, its wood dark with centuries of whispered sins. Imagine the scene: a young nun kneels, trembling, confessing thoughts she barely understands. The priest listens, too closely. He speaks softly, calling her daughter, but there's a warmth in the word that has nothing to do with fatherhood. It's hard to tell where absolution ends and affection begins. One quirky tidbit: in 14th century Spain, a confessor was once caught sneaking into a convent disguised as a washerwoman. His plan might have worked, if not for the beard he forgot to shave. The scandal spread faster than the plague. He was defrocked. The nuns were quietly relocated. You smile faintly, medieval problem-solving at its finest. By candlelight, letters move faster than footsteps. A scrap of parchment tucked into a psalter, a message disguised as a line from the Song of Songs. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. The perfect code for someone pretending to quote scripture. A nun copies it down, her quill trembling, pretending she's only practicing calligraphy. Sometimes the visitors come under pretense of holy inspection. Bishops, monks, friars, men sent to reform the sisters to test their devotion. You can picture it, a hall of veiled women, their eyes lowered, while a friar preaches about modesty with a flush on his cheeks. A few nuns shift uncomfortably. One bites her lip. Another stares directly at him, unblinking, as if to say, "You have no idea what you're talking about." The church worried about this too. Councils issued decree after decree forbidding private conversation between nuns and clergy. A mainstream fact, the Council of Trent in the 16th century reinforced strict enclosure, banning unsupervised contact altogether. But the stricter the rules, the more creative the disobedience. Historians still argue whether those reforms were meant to protect women's virtue, or the church's reputation. As you pass through the kitchen courtyard, you catch a flicker of movement, two figures near the well. A lantern glows briefly, then darkness. You hear soft laughter, the kind that breaks the silence like glass. You shouldn't be here, but you listen anyway. A whisper of Latin, then a name. A hand brushing fabric. For a moment, the air feels alive, electric, human. You remember what one medieval proverb warned. A closed convent door hides 100 open hearts. Morning comes, and rumors stir like smoke. A novice saw something. The abbess calls an assembly. The accused stand before her, faces pale, lips pressed shut. The punishment is swift, fasting, isolation, prayer. The priest is reassigned. The church pretends nothing happened. You wonder how many such stories were buried under the word discipline. Still, you can't help but notice, there's tenderness in these transgressions. Not lust alone, but loneliness. A need to be seen, touched, remembered as more than a ghost in linen. You imagine the young sister again, standing by the window after her penance, watching sunlight slide across the wall. Maybe she whispers the man's name once, then never again. You walk past the convent gate. On the outside, villagers gossip in taverns, spinning tales of nuns who sinned and priests who fell. The church calls them lies. The people call them proof that saints are made of the same flesh as sinners. Another quirky fact for you, in some regions, nuns' wells became local legends, spots where lovers were said to meet in secret, later blamed for mysterious pregnancies or miraculous healings. Pilgrims still visit a few of them today, unsure whether they're standing on holy or scandalous ground. Back inside, the abbess prays longer than usual that evening. Her voice trembles slightly as she sings, Miserere mei Deus. You can't tell if it's guilt, sorrow, or exhaustion. Maybe all three. As the final candle gutters out, you realize that every forbidden visitor leaves a trace, not just in memory, but in how these women carry themselves afterward. A nun who's been touched by the world, however briefly, will never look at her vows the same way again. And as you make your way down the corridor, the scent of incense clinging to your robes, you start to understand the paradox that pulses through these walls. The holier the place, the more human its shadows become. The days blur together, bells, prayers, the scrape of sandals across flagstones. Yet beneath the surface calm, something dangerous simmers, affection unspoken, longing barely contained. You start to notice small things. A hand brushing another's sleeve a little too long, a quick smile shared between two nuns at the washbasin, the faintest whisper that ends in nervous laughter. Secrets thrive in silence. Letters, lovers, and locked doors, this is how the heart learns to outread the rulebook. The convent's rules forbid personal writing, but ink is stubborn. It stains even the holiest intentions. You wander into the scriptorium again, where a sister is bent over her parchment. To anyone watching, she's copying scripture. But tilt your head just right, and you see it, faint lines in the margin, slanted words between prayers. They read like fragments of longing. I saw you through the lattice. The garden was bright with roses. Historians still argue whether convents produced more spiritual poetry or secret love notes. Some claim that the lyrical intensity of holy devotion was really a disguise for something far more personal. A mainstream fact supports it. Dozens of surviving manuscripts contain subtle double meanings, lines that could describe divine love or carnal desire, depending on how you read them. The nuns, it seems, mastered the art of plausible deniability centuries before lawyers existed. One particularly daring sister, we'll call her Claire, began exchanging coded letters with a monk from the nearby abbey. They hid their messages in the bindings of hymnals, delivered by a trusted lay servant. The letters grew bold, metaphors blooming like forbidden flowers. Your voice visits me in the Psalms, your breath lingers between the verses. Eventually, they were discovered. The monk was banished. Claire was confined to her cell for 40 days of silence. And yet, she emerged afterward with a serene smile, as though she had seen something holy in her suffering. Maybe she had. Love, after all, is its own religion. Sometimes the letters weren't words at all, they were gifts. A carved wooden cross, a pressed flower, a small vial of perfume. Each one an act of rebellion wrapped in devotion. You picture the trembling hands that exchanged them, the thrill of risk, the ache of secrecy. A quirky tidbit: in one English convent's archives, scholars found a list of confiscated items, including ribbons, poems, and oddly enough, a pair of silk stockings. Of indecent softness. No one recorded whose they were, of course. But the note in the margin read, "These are to be burned." You can almost hear the collective sigh of disappointment from the sisters who'd hoped otherwise. You walk the corridor after Compline, the last prayer of the night. Doors line both sides, each cell small, bare, a crucifix above every bed. But not all doors stay locked. The wooden latches are easy to lift, and the night is long. You pause near one and hear it, a soft creak, then the muffled rustle of cloth. 2 breaths sinking in the dark. The rhythm of confession, perhaps, or something older. You turn away, your heart heavy but strangely warm. In a world that demands perfection, the smallest act of tenderness becomes revolutionary. Historians still debate how common these private friendships were. Some argue they were merely platonic, a sisterly intimacy exaggerated by modern imagination. Others point to trial records, letters, even the occasional confession, suggesting that love, real, complicated, flesh and blood love, did exist behind convent walls. You realize it doesn't matter which version is truer. The longing itself was real, and that's enough. Morning comes. You watch the sisters gather for work, some in the gardens, some tending animals, others copying psalms. Claire passes you, her face calm, her eyes distant. She hums softly under her breath, a tune no one else recognizes. You wonder if it's a love song disguised as a hymn. Later, the abbess makes her rounds, eyes sharp for disobedience. She checks doors, inspects dormitories, listens for whispers. She knows temptation lives here, but she also knows she cannot kill it. The more she suppresses it, the more it thrives in quiet corners. Even she, once young, must remember what it was like to want something you weren't allowed to name. You catch her once, standing alone in the chapel after everyone's gone. She touches the altar, then presses her fingers to her lips as if to silence a thought before it escapes. For just a moment, she looks unbearably human. Another mainstream fact: in some medieval convents, the sisters had to confess not just to priests, but also publicly to one another, listing every rule they had broken. The ritual was meant to promote humility, but it often became a performance of guilt, a theater of shame where every tear was watched, every slip remembered. Yet the same practice gave women a rare kind of voice, however fragile. To speak one's own sin was, in a way, to reclaim it. One evening, you pass the library and find a candle still burning. A young novice sits there, writing quickly before the wax runs out. Her face glows in the flicker. You peek over her shoulder. It's a letter, not to a man, but to herself. "If the soul is a garden," she writes, Then desire is the wild rose that refuses pruning. You smile. That's the sort of heresy you'd frame on a wall. You step back into the corridor, where the night smells faintly of ink and lavender. Somewhere, a door closes softly. Somewhere else, a heart opens just as quietly. And you realize, as the bells call for midnight prayer, that even in the most sacred places, love finds its way, through letters, glances, or the smallest shared silence. The vows might bind the body, but not the imagination. The seasons turn without fanfare. Winter cloaks the cloister in white, the fountain freezes mid-fall, and every breath becomes a little cloud of prayer. The sisters' fingers crack and redden as they knead bread, spin wool, and illuminate psalters. You watch their patience, how they turn discomfort into devotion, cold into contemplation. Yet beneath the snow, the soil waits. Even in silence, something stirs. In spring, everything thaws: streams, gardens, hearts. The orchard bursts with blossoms, and the air smells faintly of renewal. It is the season of confessions, of small resurrections. The sisters scrubbed the chapel floors until they shine like mirrors, but some glances reflected their hold more than piety. You notice one pair of eyes meeting another across the pews, swift, cautious, but unmistakably alive. The abbess, aware that renewal invites temptation, tightens the rules. More fasting. Less idle talk. She warns against attachments of the flesh, her voice echoing through the refectory. But you sense she speaks as much to herself as to them. Desire, once named, only sharpens its teeth. And still, the world beyond the walls calls. Pilgrims pass on the nearby road, merchants bring spices and candles from distant lands, and news travels faster than prayer. One rumor spreads like wildfire: a nearby abbey has been accused of heresy. Some say their prayers included songs in the vernacular, too joyful, too human. Others whisper of visions, of ecstatic trances mistaken for divine revelation. You can almost feel the unease ripple through the convent. Where does holy fervor end and forbidden passion begin? Mainstream fact: in the 12th and 13th centuries, some mystics, like Hildegard of Bingen or Hayward of Antwerp, described their love for God in language so sensual that later theologians didn't know what to do with it. "I melt in his embrace," one wrote. "He wounds me with sweetness." These were the same centuries when the language of courtly love flourished: nights for ladies, souls for God. It's easy to see how the lines blurred. You find yourself imagining the sisters reading those writings by candlelight, their faces lit with both reverence and curiosity. Perhaps they understood that holiness was not a cold thing. Perhaps they saw in divine love the only safe way to speak of what burned within. One afternoon, you walk with Sister Agnes in the herb garden. She's older, her hands stained green from years of tending basil and rue. She talks of plants as though they were people, how some must be coaxed to bloom, others left alone to grow wild. When you ask her if she ever regretted taking vows, she smiles gently. "No," she says, "but I sometimes wish vows came with loopholes. God understands the heart better than any rule." She tucks a sprig of rosemary into your hand. "For remembrance," she says. You wonder what, or whom, she remembers. Later that day, a commotion rises in the courtyard. A lay brother from the abbey arrives, breathless, carrying a sealed letter for the abbess. Whispers spread, no one knows what's inside, but the sisters sense tension in the air, like a storm waiting to break. That night, the abbess keeps the chapel lamp burning long after everyone else has gone to bed. You catch a glimpse of her through the doorway, reading by its flicker, her face pale, her lips moving in silent prayer, or maybe apology. You learn the letter was about Claire. The monk she once loved has died in exile. The abbess tells no one, but she leaves a single candle lit in the chapel for 7 nights straight. Claire spends those nights alone in the garden, staring at the stars as if trying to read his soul among them. When she returns inside, her eyes are red but peaceful. She tells you quietly, "Love doesn't die when it's forbidden. It just learns to wear another name." In that moment you realize something profound. Chastity, as the Church defines it, was never only about abstaining. It was about control, of bodies, of words, of will. And yet the human heart resists captivity. You see it every day here, disguised as devotion, written in the margins of psalters, sung under breath while scrubbing floors. Even silence becomes a kind of language, a code only love can read. Another fact: many convents were self-sufficient communities, run entirely by women. They brewed ale, managed lands, copied books, treated the sick, and educated girls. Within these walls, women exercised authority that the outside world rarely allowed. Maybe that, too, is why desire thrived here, because independence and longing often share the same root, the yearning to feel alive, to act freely. The rhythm of convent life continues: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline. The days are beads on a rosary, each one similar yet slightly worn from touch. You've come to know the patterns so well that even your dreams fall into prayer. And yet in those dreams you hear laughter, free, unconfined. Sometimes you wake before dawn, unsure whether the sound came from memory or imagination. Summer arrives, heavy with heat. The sisters move slower, their linen habits clinging damply to their skin. Work in the gardens brings relief only in brief breezes. You pass by the orchard again, where two novices pick fruit. One tosses an apple to the other, a quick arc of red and gold, and in that simple motion lies centuries of metaphor. Forbidden fruit, offered hand to hand. A gesture older than Genesis. By evening, storms roll in. Rain lashes the windows, thunder shakes the rafters, and the wind howls through the cloisters like a restless soul. The sisters gather in the chapel, voices rising in chant to steady their fear. Yet in the flash of lightning, you catch the abbess's face again, serene, watchful, human. Her gaze flickers toward Claire, who holds her candle with both hands. For an instant, it looks like understanding passes between them, a wordless communion. The storm passes by dawn, leaving the convent washed clean. Drops cling to the roses, and the air smells of renewal once more. The sisters emerge to hang linens in the sunlight, laughter rippling between them like the sound of a distant brook. The abbess joins them briefly, smiling for the first time in weeks. For a moment, all the rules fall away, and the convent feels less like a cage, more like a living heart, beating quietly behind its stone ribs. You stand at the edge of the courtyard, watching them. You think of all the letters, the secrets, the silent loves that bloomed here unseen. Perhaps holiness and humanity were never opposites. Perhaps, in their strange, forbidden harmony, they were one and the same. Autumn slips in quietly, a slow turning of gold and rust. Leaves scatter through the cloister like forgotten prayers, carried by the wind into corners no broom can reach. You feel the season changing not just in the air, but in the rhythm of the sisters' lives. The songs sound lower, more reflective, even the laughter in the refectory softens, as though wrapped in wool. This is the season of reflection, the gathering of what has ripened, and the letting go of what cannot last. The abbess calls for a week of retreat, no speech except for prayer. Silence descends like snow, covering every sound but the echo of your own heartbeat. You begin to notice how rich silence can be, the creak of wood, the scratch of quills, the wind breathing through stone. Even the smallest sound becomes sacred. Yet in this stillness, thoughts grow louder. You wonder how many of the sisters use the silence to commune not just with God, but with memories of those they've loved and lost. Mainstream fact: medieval mystics often described silence as a form of divine language. The 12th century abbess Hildegard of Bingen called it the mother of all sound. But silence also had its politics. It was used to control speech, to keep obedience neat and hearts contained. Still, as with all things forbidden, women found ways to make silence their own. They wrote with gestures, glances, and the rhythmic tapping of fingers, a secret Morse code long before its time. You see it one evening in the kitchen. Sister Agnes, the herbalist, passes a jar of honey to a younger novice. Their fingers brush, a deliberate pause before retreat. Nothing is said, but everything is felt. The air holds the residue of unspoken tenderness. You realize now that this convent speaks 1,000 dialects of love, none sanctioned, all alive. Then, a visitor arrives, a bishop from the diocese, tall and thin as a candlewick. His arrival throws the convent into measured panic. Floors scrubbed twice, veils straightened, scrolls inspected. He comes to inspect the purity of discipline. The words sound more like a threat than a blessing. You watch as the abbess receives him in the chapter house, her head bowed but her posture unyielding. She has governed this place for decades. She knows the weight of eyes like his. During his stay, the bishop questions several sisters. Were the rules kept? Were letters exchanged? Were confessions sincere? His tone suggests suspicion more than curiosity. The air turns brittle, even the birds seem quieter. You sense that under the scrutiny of men, holiness becomes theater. Every bow, every phrase must perform virtue. Yet behind lowered lashes, defiance still gleams. That night you find Claire in the chapel. She kneels before the altar, candlelight trembling across her face. He asks about love. She whispers. But he would not understand it. She smiles faintly. He measures faith by obedience. I measure it by compassion. Her voice is barely audible, yet her words fill the room. You realize she no longer hides her heart. It has become her scripture. Later, in the scriptorium, the bishop inspects the manuscripts. He pauses over one, a psalter illuminated with vines and roses. Too worldly, he mutters. The illuminator, a shy sister named Beatrix, stands beside him, fingers trembling. When he leaves, you notice that in one margin she's drawn a tiny bird with an open beak. Not a mistake, a message. Freedom hiding in plain sight. After the inspection, life resumes its fragile rhythm. But something has shifted. The sisters move with a new awareness, as though reminded of how easily their world could be broken. They cling to small joys, a shared plum, a story whispered over laundry, the warmth of hands in winter. You begin to understand that joy itself, in this world, is an act of resistance. Another fact: many medieval women entered convents not by choice, but by family arrangement. Daughters without dowries were given to God, like offerings. Yet once enclosed, some discovered unexpected freedom. Inside these walls, women could learn Latin, manage estates, write, paint, and lead, opportunities the outside world denied them. Ironically, the cloister meant both captivity and liberation, depending on how one saw it. You witness that paradox one crisp evening as the sun bleeds red through the stained glass. The abbess gathers the sisters in the courtyard. She speaks of the harvest, of gratitude, of endurance. But as she talks, her eyes stray to the horizon, beyond the walls. We live apart, she says softly, but not untouched. The world changes, even when we cannot see it. And perhaps, she adds with a glance at Claire, God asks us not to escape desire, but to sanctify it. The words hang in the air like incense. Some nod in understanding, others lower their gaze. But everyone feels the shift. The abbess, once the enforcer of rules, now sounds like a woman who has made peace with contradiction. Later that night, the wind rises again. You walk through the cloister garden, where the last roses droop under the weight of dew. Somewhere, a psalm drifts from an open window, a voice tender, trembling. You pause, listening. It's Claire's voice, soft but sure. Love is strong as death, jealousy fierce as the grave. The ancient words from the Song of Songs carry through the darkness, both prayer and confession. You think of how that text survived centuries of censorship, cloaked in divine metaphor. It is the Bible's most daring poem, where passion and holiness are one and the same. Perhaps that's why the nuns loved it so dearly. It gave them language for what could not otherwise be spoken. By dawn, the storm has passed. Mist curls through the orchard, and the first light filters over the walls. You watch the sisters file into the chapel once more, their footsteps soft as breath. They kneel, heads bowed, lips moving in silent rhythm. But you know now what those prayers carry: fragments of longing, shards of memory, echoes of laughter. Not sin. Not rebellion. Simply the whole truth of being human. And in that moment you see the convent for what it truly is, not a place of repression, but a vast, imperfect symphony of yearning, each note trembling between heaven and earth. Winter returns with a slow, deliberate grace, as if the world itself is inhaling. Frost spreads across the cloister arches like lace, and the fountain freezes again, a sculpture of stillness. The sisters wrap themselves in wool and discipline. Smoke curls from the kitchen chimneys. Candles burn longer in the chapel. The air smells of wax and rosemary. It feels like time itself has folded inward, a circle rather than a line. You lose track of days. Only bells remain certain. The rhythm of devotion continues, but beneath it runs another pulse. You begin to notice how memory haunts these walls like a scent that never fades. Every stone has absorbed the stories whispered against it. Every prayer carries a trace of someone's secret hope. Even silence has texture now, layered with all that has been withheld. One night, the abbess calls you to the chapter house. A single candle burns on the long wooden table. Her face, half in shadow, looks both ancient and young. "The bishop has written again," she says quietly. "He warns that our convent is too expressive. Too many songs, too much laughter." Her mouth curves into a small smile. "As if joy were a sin." She pauses, then looks at you directly. "Tell me, do you think joy offends God?" You hesitate. The right answer depends on which God you imagine, the distant one carved in judgment, or the one who laughed with fishermen and touched lepers. You choose the latter. "No, mother," you say. "I think joy honors him." Her smile deepens, a flicker of relief. "Then we will keep singing," she says simply, and blows out the candle. Mainstream fact: medieval church authorities often regulated music in convents, fearing it could inflame the senses. Some bishops forbade polyphony, the blending of multiple voices, believing harmony led to emotional disorder. Yet despite such bans, evidence from convent manuscripts shows that nuns composed, performed, and even innovated sacred music. Their songs, rich with longing and beauty, became coded languages of resistance. The next morning, the sisters gather for choir practice. Their breath steams in the cold air as they rehearse a hymn newly written by Sister Beatrix, the same who once drew the hidden bird in her manuscript. The melody rises, delicate yet defiant, weaving through the vaulted ceiling like light through glass. You watch the abbess listening, eyes closed, lips moving silently with the tune. Even the most devout heart, it seems, cannot resist beauty. Claire stands beside Beatrix, her voice soft but steady. You notice that when their notes meet, something happens, a shimmering undertone, a resonance too subtle for rules to govern. Perhaps this is what love becomes when denied every other form: sound turns sacred. Later, you find Claire in the garden again, brushing snow off the herbs. She hums the same melody under her breath. You ask if she misses the world beyond the walls? She laughs quietly. "Sometimes. But out there, I was invisible. In here, I'm someone." Her eyes flick toward the chapel. "Even if no one knows who that someone truly is." Her words linger long after she leaves. It occurs to you that the convent, for all its constraints, gave women something the world withheld: a place to think, to write, to exist without belonging to a man. The price was freedom of the body, but perhaps, in some strange exchange, they gained freedom of the mind. A few weeks later, a messenger arrives bearing grim news: famine grips the surrounding villages. The abbess orders the convent stores open to the poor. Barrels of grain, jars of honey, bundles of herbs, all carried through the gates. The sisters work from dawn to dusk, hands raw, feet numb. Yet their faces glow with quiet purpose. Compassion, you realize, is the truest form of rebellion. Another mainstream fact: during crises like plague or famine, many convents became centers of relief. Nuns served as healers, teachers, and even negotiators with local lords. Chronicles from the 14th century record convents saving entire towns from starvation. Yet their work often went unacknowledged, erased by the pens of men who preferred miracles to management. That winter, the convent's bell tolls more often, for prayer, for death, for gratitude. You attend the burial of an old sister, one whose name few remember but whose hands built the very walls that shelter you. The ground is frozen, the grave shallow, yet the ceremony feels profound. The abbess recites the psalms in a trembling voice. From dust we came, she begins, but then falters. Claire steps forward to continue the prayer. Her tone carries no fear, only gentleness. And to love we shall return. Afterward, the sisters file back silently, snow crunching beneath their sandals. You linger a moment longer by the grave, watching your breath drift upward like incense. The world feels fragile yet alive. Weeks pass. The famine eases. Birds return to the courtyard, their songs weaving through the cloister arches like blessings. Life resumes its delicate rhythm, bells, prayers, small rebellions. You start to sense that the convent's story isn't one of suppression, but survival. The nuns have learned the art of existing between extremes, obedience and defiance, solitude and community, heaven and earth. One afternoon, you find Beatrix illuminating a new manuscript. Gold leaf gleams beneath her brush. In the corner of the page, she paints a vine curling around the words, Amor vincit omnia. Love conquers all. You raise an eyebrow, half in jest. Isn't that a dangerous phrase? She smiles. Only if you believe it. Evening falls. Candles flicker in every window. The sisters gather for Compline, voices blending in low, drowsy harmony. You sit in the shadows, listening, letting the music wash through you. The air smells of wax and lavender. The notes rise and fall like breathing. And you realize that this quiet, imperfect, stubborn beauty is the truest kind of faith. Not the faith of rules, but of resilience. As the final Amen fades, the abbess lifts her head. Her eyes meet yours, and in that moment you understand something unspoken. She knows every secret that has passed within these walls. She knows about the letters, the glances, the whispered songs. And yet she allows it all to continue, not from weakness, but from wisdom. She understands what the world still forgets, that love, in all its forms, is not the enemy of holiness. It is its echo. You leave the chapel with that thought burning softly in your chest. Outside, the moon glows over the snow like a promise kept in silence. Morning sunlight cuts across the stone courtyard, laying gold over gray. The air smells of wet linen and rosemary. Sisters have been washing habits in silence. You follow them with your eyes, their movements careful, rhythmic, each gesture folded in obedience. Yet something beneath the surface is restless. You can feel it in the air like static before a storm. By midday, the bishop's envoy walks the corridors again, his boots echoing too loudly for sacred ground. He asks questions with the patience of a man who already knows the answers. Who among you spends too much time alone with Father Matthias? Who lingers after confession? Who speaks during the great silence? No one answers. Eyes stay low. Hands tighten on rosaries. Then Sister Margaret, the oldest nun in the house, nearly blind, speaks. We serve God, she says, but even God has enemies who wear his robes. The envoy's jaw tightens. He writes her words down anyway. Rumors have become investigation. The convent, once sealed by trust, is now a vessel leaking secrets. You slip through the cloister, imagining what it felt like for them, to live in a world where every glance might be misread, every act of kindness mistaken for sin. To love one another was already dangerous. To be accused of it was ruin. In the refectory that night, the sisters eat in silence, as always. Bread, lentils, water. But no one tastes the food. At the head table sits the abbess, pale as parchment, her eyes darting from face to face. She knows what's coming. After supper, the envoy stands. His voice cuts through the hall. Sisters, by order of His Grace, all correspondence and confessions are to be surrendered. Any failure to comply shall be seen as rebellion against the Church. A gasp passes through the hall like wind through reeds. Letters, those secret lifelines to families, to friends, are now contraband. Sister Agnes feels the blood drain from her face. Hidden in her cell lies a folded parchment written not to family, but to another sister. It is not love confessed, but love implied. Tender words, inked by a trembling hand. That night, as the bell tolls for matins, she burns the letter over a candle flame. The wax drips onto her wrist, searing her skin. She does not cry out. But outside her door, someone watches, the novice, young Beatrix, wide-eyed and impressionable. The next morning, Beatrix confides in the envoy. I saw Sister Agnes destroy something. She wept while doing it. He nods. That's enough. By evening, Agnes is summoned. In the cold chapter room, she stands before the abbess, the envoy, and Father Matthias. The priest avoids her gaze. Is it true you consorted with forbidden affection? The envoy demands. No, my lord. Then what did you burn? A letter of prayer. She lies softly. Nothing more. Father Matthias shifts. The envoy's eyes narrow. Bring the ashes, he orders. The ashes, retrieved from her chamber, still hold the faint outline of words. Enough for accusation, not for defense. The abbess rises, her voice trembling with sorrow. Sister Agnes, until the truth is known, you are confined to silence and solitude. It is a punishment short of excommunication, but heavy as death. The sisters lead her away. She does not resist. From that day, she prays alone in the garden, under the watch of crows and clouds. The herbs she tends, sage, rue, lavender, become her company. And sometimes, at dusk, Father Matthias walks past the wall, pretending not to look, though every step of his betrays him. Inside, the convent splinters. Whispers bloom like mold in damp corners. Some say Agnes was tempted by the devil. Others say she was punished for loving too deeply. But no one speaks aloud what all of them feel, that the line between holiness and hunger has never been so thin. Weeks pass. Then, one morning, Father Matthias disappears. His cell is empty, his books gone. The bishop's envoy leaves the same day, satisfied that order has been restored. The convent resumes its rhythm. Bells, chants, silence. But something fundamental has changed. Sister Margaret mutters to herself during prayer. They came to cleanse the house of sin, she says, but left it hollow. And though the walls still stand, you can sense it, the loss of innocence, the quiet despair. The sisters now speak in glances, pray with fear, confess with hesitation. The scandal has passed, yes, but it left behind a wound that never healed. You walk through the cloister one last time before night. Moonlight spills through the arches, silvering the stone. You see a shadow near the garden, a figure kneeling where the lavender grows. It's Agnes. Still alive. Still praying. Her hands are folded, her lips move silently. But then she looks up, as if sensing your presence across time. And for an instant you see no guilt in her eyes, only peace. Perhaps she has found a holiness that the church could not define. Perhaps, after all the silence, she has learned the secret that saints and sinners share, that to love, even in the darkness, is still to touch the divine. The bell tolls for Compline. You close your eyes. The echo fades. And you realize, the true scandal of the cloister was never love itself. It was the fear of it. Winter returns, sharp and unforgiving. The convent roof drips with icicles like glass teeth, and the mornings are so cold that the breath of the sisters looks like incense rising toward an indifferent sky. The scandal has faded from the bishop's memory, but not from the hearts of those who lived it. Every sound now seems louder, the closing of a door, the drop of a spoon, the distant crow calling from the fields beyond the wall. You wake before the bells and wander the cloister, your breath clouding in the dim half-light. Snow muffles the world, turning the courtyard into a still, white confession. A few sisters shovel paths to the garden, others carry buckets from the well. Their fingers are raw, their faces pale, but the rhythm of duty carries them. Obedience, after all, is a kind of warmth when the body grows numb. And yet, beneath the hush of snow, something else stirs, a slow, quiet rebellion. In the refectory, new hymns have begun to appear in the chant books, melodies the abbess did not approve, verses no one admits to writing. They speak of the fire of divine yearning, of the beloved hidden within the soul. On the surface, they praise God. But between the lines, they breathe of human desire, of the same forbidden tenderness that once nearly tore the house apart. The abbess suspects. She calls the sisters to chapter one evening and asks who composed them. Silence follows, heavy and unbroken. Only the wind answers, whistling through the gaps in the shutters. She sighs. If none will confess, then all shall fast. 3 days of thin broth and harder prayer follow. The chapel is cold, the candles flicker weakly, and the psalms echo through the stone like lamentations for something lost. Yet even in hunger, the secret hymns spread, copied by trembling hands after midnight. You realize what's happening. The nuns are turning longing into liturgy. Desire has become devotion. Rebellion has become prayer. One night you find Sister Beatrix, the same novice who once betrayed Agnes, kneeling in the library, her eyes swollen from crying. She startles when you enter, clutching a small parchment to her chest. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she whispers. "I thought I was protecting the convent." You nod, and she shows you what she's been writing, a hymn, soft and simple, addressed to no one and everyone. "Let mercy fall like snow," it reads, "and cover what the heart cannot forget." You imagine Agnes hearing those words in her solitude, and for the first time, you sense that forgiveness might still live here, fragile, but breathing. Days lengthen. The snow melts. The abbess grows frail, her steps slower, her eyes dim. She spends more time in the chapel alone, sitting before the altar as though waiting for an answer that never comes. Sometimes you catch her smiling faintly at the window, watching the younger sisters laugh in the garden. She no longer scolds them for joy. Perhaps she has learned what every rulebook forgets. Holiness is not the absence of love, but the gentleness with which one bears it. When the abbess falls ill, it is Agnes who tends her. Wordlessly, she brings water, wipes her brow, hums the same strange tune she once sang in the garden. The abbess listens, eyes closed. "I was cruel," she murmurs one night, her voice thin as paper. Agnes shakes her head. "You were afraid." "And you?" Agnes pauses. "I was human." The abbess smiles at that, truly smiles, and for the first time in years, peace settles over the convent like a benediction. After her passing, the sisters bury her beneath the oldest yew tree in the courtyard. Snow falls again, soft and slow, as if the heavens themselves are trying to remember her gently. That night, the convent dreams. You see it in the way candles burn longer than they should, in the way the walls seem to breathe, in the sudden stillness of the air before matins. You dream too, though you are only passing through time's echo. In your dream, you walk the same corridors, but they are filled with light. The sisters move freely, their veils translucent, their laughter echoing like bells. The abbess walks beside Agnes, no longer stern, her hands open. Letters float like feathers through the air, unburned and unread because no one needs to hide them anymore. Love and devotion have merged, no longer rivals, but reflections of the same eternal flame. When you wake, the bell is ringing for dawn prayer. You realize the dream wasn't just fantasy, it was memory transformed, the spirit of a place that learned painfully that the soul cannot live on obedience alone. As the chant begins again, you whisper the words Beatrix wrote. "Let mercy fall like snow, and cover what the heart cannot forget." And for the first time since you arrived, the air feels warm. Spring arrives shyly, like a girl entering a room where she isn't sure she's welcome. The convent stirs from its long hibernation. The scent of thawed earth mingles with candle wax, and crocuses bloom between cracks in the flagstones. Life insists on returning, no matter how often it has been buried. You walk through the orchard, where apple trees have begun to blush with buds. A few sisters prune the branches, laughter carried softly on the wind. Their joy feels different this year, less cautious, more alive. The air hums with renewal, though the scars of winter still linger beneath the bark. The abbess's absence has left a hollow that no rule can fill. A new one has been elected, Sister Helena, younger, gentler, a woman who listens more than she speaks. Her voice carries calm rather than command. She restores small freedoms, longer walks, more reading time, permission for each sister to write her own meditations again. "The pen," she says, "is not the enemy of prayer, it is its echo." The old ink pots return to use, the scriptorium hums with quiet purpose, and soon the walls themselves seem to absorb the rhythm of quills scratching like wings. Yet you sense that writing here is never merely writing, it's confession in disguise. You pause beside Sister Beatrix, who is copying a psalm. In the margin, she adds a single line in her neat hand. The soul is a window, the light depends on what we dare to open. She looks up and smiles when she catches you watching. It's only a metaphor, she says. You both know it's not. Nearby, another sister sketches small illuminations, gold halos, curling vines, and hidden among them, the faint outline of two intertwined roses. A secret symbol of love and loss, preserved in paint. The church might never know, but history will. It always does. A mainstream fact slips into your thoughts. By the late Middle Ages, women in convents had become some of Europe's most skilled artists, musicians, and writers. Their isolation, meant to silence them, had instead turned inward energy into creation. You can see it now, the paradox of repression birthing beauty. The more they were forbidden to express, the deeper their art became. But art is dangerous when it reveals too much truth. One afternoon, a visiting confessor arrives, a young priest named Father Lucien. His reputation is one of strict piety, but his eyes betray curiosity. He asks to inspect the sister's writings for spiritual guidance. Helena hesitates but agrees. After all, even gentle abbesses must bow to oversight. You watch as he reads their words one after another. His brow furrows, then lifts, then furrows again. Desire, disguised as devotion. Longing, braided into psalms. He looks up. Some of these are ambiguous, he says. Helena meets his gaze steadily. So is the human heart. He clears his throat, uncertain how to respond. Later that evening, in the candlelit chapel, Lucien preaches a sermon about the perils of imagination. He warns that Satan hides in metaphors and that not all beauty is holy. The sisters listen politely. When he finishes, Beatrix leans toward you and whispers, "Then perhaps the devil was a poet." You nearly laugh aloud. Yet that night, the unease returns. The balance between freedom and fear is fragile. A single accusation could undo everything Helena has rebuilt. To soothe their anxiety, the sisters gather for evening recreation, rare, precious time when laughter is permitted. They tell stories, old legends of saints and miracles. One story stands out, a tale of Saint Agnes of Montepulciano, who was said to have levitated in prayer. But as they tell it, their eyes drift toward their own Agnes, now older, quieter, still tending the herb garden like a woman half vanished into peace. After the others leave, you linger by her side. Their stories always end in miracles, you say. She smiles faintly. That's because miracles are easier to believe than forgiveness. You fall silent, watching her crush lavender leaves between her palms. Do you think the abbess forgave herself? You ask. Agnes looks up. We never forgive ourselves entirely. We just learn to live with the memory. The scent of lavender fills the air, sweet, sharp, cleansing. For a moment, it feels like absolution. In the days that follow, Father Lucien's reports to the bishop grow milder, more uncertain. The strict edges of his faith soften as he witnesses the sisters' devotion expressed through beauty, not penance. Perhaps he begins to see what they already know, that holiness can live in the tension between discipline and desire. One evening, you find him standing in the cloister, staring at the fading light on the stone. They pray differently here, he murmurs. It feels human. You nod. Maybe that's the truest kind. He does not look away. If I say that in my next sermon, they'll call me a heretic. You smile. Then you'll be in good company. He laughs quietly, the sound echoing like a confession he didn't know he was making. In time, he leaves, and life continues. But his shadow lingers in the sisters' writings, new verses that speak of compassion born from understanding, of love that transcends fear. You walk through the cloister one last time before dusk. The walls are still the same, yet something feels transformed. The air carries not just incense but possibility. The convent has become a paradox made flesh, a place of enclosure that somehow expands the soul. In one cell, a sister kneels in prayer. On her desk lies a small mirror, one of the few allowed objects of vanity. Yet she isn't studying her face. She's watching the flame of a candle reflected in the glass. You realize then that every nun here lives between reflection and reality, between the mask they must wear and the truth burning quietly behind it. The bell tolls for Compline. You close your eyes and listen. Somewhere in the chapel, a voice begins to sing, not a sanctioned hymn, but one of their own secret compositions. Others join, their harmonies rising like incense into the night. And for the first time, the sound doesn't feel hidden or forbidden. It feels like freedom disguised as prayer. Dawn spills through the stained glass in slow, colored bands, crimson, gold, blue, casting holy bruises across the chapel floor. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and lilies. You hear the rustle of veils as the sisters kneel in rows, their voices blending in one final psalm for the season. Each word feels ancient, weighty, yet alive. It's been years since you first crossed these cloistered halls. The convent has changed, not outwardly, but in spirit. It no longer feels like a fortress of rules but a garden of contradictions, devotion and doubt, silence and song, chastity and love. Even the stones seem to breathe differently now, less cold, more forgiving. Sister Helena, the new abbess, stands at the lectern. Her face is lined with wisdom, not fear. Sisters, she says, today we remember not only the martyrs of faith, but also the quiet ones, the women whose hearts broke for love, and who kept praying anyway. Her words hang in the air like incense. Some of the older nuns lower their heads. Others meet her gaze with tears they don't bother to hide. You think of Claire, the daring sister who once exchanged letters through hymnals. You think of Agnes, who bore exile with grace. You think of Beatrix, who learned guilt and mercy in equal measure. Their stories live now in whispers, in hidden verses, in the melodies sung under breath during evening prayer. The Church may have written their names out of record books, but not out of memory. After Mass, you follow the sisters as they scatter to their work. In the garden, the air hums with bees. Agnes, older now, her hair silver beneath her veil, kneels among the herbs, pruning with slow, deliberate care. You crouch beside her. Still tending the same patch? You ask softly. She smiles. The same patch. But the soil changes, as we do. You watch her hands, still gentle despite the years. Her fingertips are stained green from sage and mint. Do you ever regret staying? Agnes pauses. Once I thought holiness meant running from desire. Now I see it means letting it bloom, but not letting it rule. Desire is part of the garden too. It just needs tending. You let her words settle. The wind stirs through the lavender, carrying a faint sweetness, like memory refusing to fade. Later, in the library, Beatrix is reading aloud to a few novices. Her voice lilts over the parchment, a new collection of meditations composed by the sisters themselves. She's older now, her once nervous energy replaced with calm assurance. You recognize her hymn among the pages. Let mercy fall like snow, and cover what the heart cannot forget. It's become part of the convent's regular chant, anonymous, of course, but everyone knows who wrote it. When the novices leave, she closes the book and smiles at you. Funny, isn't it? That what once brought punishment now brings comfort. You nod. You turned confession into scripture. She laughs softly. No, just into honesty. Maybe that's the same thing. Evening draws near. The bell tolls for vespers, slow and steady. The sun spills its last light through the cloister arches, gilding the stone. Helena joins the procession of sisters into the chapel. But instead of beginning with the psalm, she raises a hand. Tonight, she says, before we pray, each of you will write a single line, a truth you've carried but never spoken. You needn't sign it. You need only be sincere. A murmur ripples through the group, but no one objects. Paper and ink are passed from hand to hand. Heads bow in silence. You can almost hear the scratching of quills, an orchestra of unburdening. When the candles burn low, Helena gathers the pages and reads them aloud. I loved once, and it made me see God more clearly. I have doubted more than I have believed. I dreamed of freedom, and perhaps I was already free. I am not perfect, and that is my offering. No names. No judgment. Only truth, naked and luminous. When she finishes, the chapel is utterly still. Then one by one, the sisters begin to sing, not in Latin, but in their own language. The melody rises like dawn after a long night. You stand among them, invisible but deeply moved. This is not rebellion anymore. It's resurrection. And as their song fills the air, you understand what the centuries never could, that the scandal of the nuns was never their love, but their courage to feel, to write, to imagine. Their sin, if one must call it that, was humanity. The bells toll midnight. The convent sleeps. You walk once more through the cloister, the air cool and sweet. In the garden, the moonlight catches on lavender, on the worn stone, on the faint impression of footsteps long faded. You stop at the old wall and trace a line of ancient graffiti, a heart carved centuries ago, its edges softened by time. Beneath it, a single word remains, amor. Love. You smile. The word has outlived them all. As you turn to leave, the breeze carries a whisper, almost like a hymn, voices layered through time, soft but unbroken. Let mercy fall like snow, and cover what the heart cannot forget. The doors close behind you. Bells fade into silence. The story of the convent, like every human soul, ends not in scandal but in grace. Because in the end, love always finds a way through the walls built to contain it. You wander now through the changing centuries, where the echoes of the convent have not yet faded but transformed. The nuns are gone, yet their fingerprints linger everywhere, on parchment and stone, in the faint recipes for ale and poultice, in the very rhythm of village life. What was once secret and sacred begins to re-emerge in unexpected places, whispered not in Latin but in the language of survival. You find yourself in a 16th century apothecary's shop. Shelves line the walls, heavy with jars of herbs, angelica, rosemary, mugwort, and hops. The woman who tends them, sleeves rolled and hands stained green, could have been a sister once. She grinds her powders with the same deliberate calm you once saw in the cloister gardens. When customers call her wise woman, they mean healer. When officials call her witch, they mean dangerous. Her remedies, her brewing, her midwifery, they all trace back to convent lore. The recipes for healing oils once penned in Latin prayer books now survive in coded margins of domestic manuals. The sacred knowledge the nuns guarded behind stone walls has gone to ground, reborn in kitchens and hearths, passed hand to hand like contraband light. You see, the Reformation and Renaissance both conspired to erase and yet preserve them. Monks became scholars. Nuns became ghosts that haunted the margins of progress. Universities flourished, men's worlds, but in backrooms, women kept brewing, binding, writing, and curing, keeping the hidden pulse of medieval knowledge alive. In England, a brewer's wife mixes herbs with uncanny skill, descended from the aloes who once learned their craft from convent brewers. In Italy, a midwife hums Ave Marias as she helps new life into the world, using the same birthing prayers the nuns once murmured in candlelight. In France, a poetess pens verses of divine longing, borrowing the voice of the mystic nuns who once wrote of love's union with God. The cloister's legacy endures, invisible yet indelible. You travel onward, centuries rolling past like pages turned by unseen hands. In every village you hear echoes, the same chants reshaped as lullabies, the same discipline of the scriptorium reborn in embroidery or poetry. Even the order of daily life, the rising bells, the mealtime prayers, the contemplative silence, lives on in small, domestic rituals that women keep alive without realizing their origin. But with inheritance comes distortion. The same female wisdom that once sustained the sick and poor now threatens to be punished. The learned woman becomes suspect. The herbalist becomes witch. The brewer becomes competitor. The silence once chosen now becomes enforced. You remember the abbess who once warned, "Our silence will be our strength." But history twists silence into shadow. The knowledge that once bloomed in the convent gardens now hides behind closed shutters. The songs once sung in chapel now echo in secret gatherings under the moon. Yet not all airs are hidden. A few noblewomen, educated by nuns before the dissolutions, take the torch openly. They sponsor hospitals, found schools, and keep small presses alive. In their libraries, you glimpse manuscripts written by anonymous female hands, works of science, devotion, and art that carry faint traces of convent discipline. Through them, you sense a strange resurrection. Though the veil has been torn, its fabric now stretches across a broader sky. The contemplative spirit of the medieval nuns slips into modern forms: nurses in hospitals, teachers in schools, artists in garrets, writers in candlelit corners, all seeking transcendence through discipline, devotion, and creation. You pause at a quiet scene, a 17th-century nurse tending a fevered child. The light from her lamp trembles across the walls. Her posture, her patience, her prayer under breath, all mirror the long lineage of sisters before her. She doesn't know their names, but she carries their presence. Every gesture feels like remembrance, though she couldn't say of what. And you, wandering through these centuries, feel that continuity. The nuns may have vanished from their convents, but they live in gestures, in crafts, in words. They became the invisible mentors of generations who never knew their teachers. As dawn breaks over a city that hums with trade and invention, you realize something quietly radical. The medieval nun, bound by vows of silence and obedience, became, through the paradox of history, the mother of independent thought and practical knowledge. Their veils turned to paper, their chants to ink, their devotion to skill, their confinement to legacy. The world moved on, but under its surface, their spirit still breathed, calm, disciplined, creative, quietly changing everything it touched. And so, as you move toward the age of enlightenment, you can almost hear the faintest echo, carried through the wind in centuries. The sound of quills scratching in candlelight, of soft feet on stone, of prayers turned into progress. The veil may have fallen, but its threads wove the future. You find yourself standing at the edge of modernity, where the clang of industry replaces the tolling of bells, and the scent of ink and iron hangs heavy in the air. The cloisters have dissolved, the walls fallen to dust, but their rhythm remains, in the ordered chaos of hospitals, in the quiet determination of classrooms, in the solitude of artists bent over their work. Once, the nuns were accused of knowing too much. Now, knowledge is everyone's right. Yet you sense that same paradox lingering. Freedom invites its own kind of devotion, and modern life, so noisy, so hurried, still yearns for the stillness those women once guarded. You walk through a 19th-century infirmary. The sisters here wear crisp linen, not coarse wool, but the gestures are the same, the cool cloth pressed to a fevered brow, the whispered prayer at a dying bed. Florence Nightingale herself studied under Catholic nuns, learning not just hygiene but compassion measured in ritual precision. She called it the discipline of mercy, a phrase that could have been lifted straight from a medieval rulebook. The same discipline flows into art. You pause in a painter's studio, canvas stretched, light spilling from a high window. She paints not saints but ordinary women, workers, mothers, dreamers. Yet look closer, and you see the old vocabulary of holiness, halos now replaced by lamplight, altars by kitchen tables. Her art baptizes the mundane. Like the mystic nuns before her, she transforms the everyday into revelation. You wander next into a university library. Between shelves of theology and science, you find the reemergence of voices long suppressed. Scholars rediscover the writings of Hildegard of Bingen, Mechthild of Magdeburg, and Julian of Norwich, women who dared to describe divine union in the language of passion and body. For centuries their visions had been dismissed as hysteria or heresy. Now, they're recognized as philosophy in another tongue. Their rediscovery electrifies the modern mind. Artists quote them, feminists reclaim them, mystics revere them. Suddenly, the convent isn't a prison but a prototype, a place where women once built worlds of meaning from silence, where they found power in discipline, and creativity in constraint. Even psychology catches the echo. A Viennese doctor listens to his patient confess her secret desires, her guilt, her dreams. He calls it therapy. But you hear an older rhythm, the confessional reborn, stripped of altar and incense, yet still chasing redemption through speech. What was once called sin becomes symptom. The vocabulary changes, but the longing remains. The world has grown bolder too. The veil no longer hides faces but ideas. Writers, poets, filmmakers, all turn to the convent as symbol, mirror, metaphor. Some see repression, others liberation. Some romanticize the nuns as tragic lovers of God, others celebrate them as quiet rebels who found agency in obedience. Every age rewrites their story, but none can silence it. You walk through a modern convent now, sleek halls, electric lights, laptops beside crucifixes. The sisters here run websites, publish blogs, teach coding, manage hospitals. Yet their life remains a rhythm of prayer and service, a dialogue between ancient vows and modern needs. They smile when asked if they feel imprisoned. "We are freer than most," one says, "because we know what we have chosen." Her words linger as you leave, echoing across centuries of struggle. Freedom, after all, was never about doing whatever one pleased, it was about finding meaning in what one must do. The medieval nun knew that long before philosophers did. You pass through a museum next, where relics of the cloister rest behind glass, a carved rosary, a scrap of parchment, a silver cross dulled by centuries of touch. Children press their faces to the glass, fascinated by these fragments of another world. You can't help but smile. The same curiosity that once peered through the lattice of a cloister window now peers through museum glass. And still, in the quiet corners of modern life, the old paradox breathes. Artists seek transcendence through creation. Scientists seek truth through observation. Lovers seek eternity in a single moment of surrender. All of them, in their own way, live out the lesson of those hidden women, that devotion, whether to God, art, or love, is the path that burns and heals in equal measure. You realize now that the story of the medieval nun is not an ending, but a mirror. She reflects the eternal human tension between spirit and flesh, obedience and desire, silence and expression. Every generation rediscovers her under new names: nurse, poet, teacher, activist, scientist. She is not a relic. She is an archetype. And as the world grows louder, her quiet wisdom becomes revolutionary again. In her discipline, there is resistance. In her solitude, there is creation. In her longing, there is truth. When you close your eyes, you still hear it: the rhythm of sandals on stone, the soft rise of voices in prayer, the faint creak of a door at midnight. The past has not ended, it has only changed its garments. The veil, it turns out, was never about hiding. It was about revealing what the world was too hurried to see. You return at last to where it all began, not a single place, but a feeling. The hush before dawn. The flicker of a candle. The rhythm of a heart still awake in the dark. The convent has dissolved, the centuries have turned, but something eternal lingers, something that refuses to die with walls or vows. You walk again through the ruins of a cloister. The arches are broken, the gardens wild, yet the air hums with memory. You touch the cold stone and feel warmth, faint but steady, like the last ember of a fire that once burned for God, for beauty, for love. The ground beneath your feet still remembers the soft echo of sandals, the murmur of psalms, the laughter that never made it into the official chronicles. The sky is the same sky they once looked upon, pale blue, boundless, indifferent, and yet somehow intimate. You close your eyes and hear them, the chanting of sisters long gone, their voices overlapping across time, a harmony of obedience and rebellion, of longing that refused to be tamed. It strikes you then how little has changed. The world still builds walls, different ones now, of ambition, noise, distraction. But still, beneath every routine, something stirs. A pulse of wonder. A longing for something pure and unbroken. The human heart is the same, it still wants to love, to create, to be known, to be forgiven. The convent was only ever a mirror for that desire. You think of Sister Clare and her forbidden letters. Of the novice who compared her soul to a garden of untamed roses. Of the abbess who pressed her fingers to her lips to silence a thought she dared not speak. Their stories dissolve into myth, but their emotions, those remain vividly human. They dreamed, they feared, they broke rules, they sought grace. Their faith was messy, imperfect, alive. History remembers saints and sinners separately, but here, in the echoing ruins, they are the same. The saint burns with desire, the sinner seeks redemption. Both kneel in the same dust, whispering to the same silence. You wander through the grass now, where the cloister walk once stood. A butterfly rises from a crack in the stone, a small miracle, unnoticed except by you. You smile. The nuns would have read meaning into that, seen it as a sign, a message, a resurrection. Perhaps they were right. The wind shifts, and you smell lavender and ink, the scent of devotion and rebellion, of love written where it wasn't allowed. You realize how these women, constrained and hidden, helped shape the world beyond their walls. Through their prayers, their poems, their discipline, they preserve something civilization too often forgets: the sacredness of attention. To pay attention, to a candle flame, to a heartbeat, to a single act of kindness, was their rebellion. And it is yours, too. You look out toward the horizon, where the ruins fade into light. The story of the convent is not a tragedy, but a lesson written in silence, that love, in all its forbidden forms, is not a weakness but a force that remakes the world. It hides in rituals, in letters, in whispered confessions, and it always finds its way back to the surface. You imagine the last nun leaving these walls centuries ago. She pauses at the gate, looks back once, and smiles, not in sorrow, but in knowing. The building will crumble. The rules will fade. But what she carried inside, discipline, devotion, longing, compassion, will live on in others. In every artist who works late by candlelight. In every scientist who seeks order in chaos. In every lover who risks truth for tenderness. You stand where she stood, listening to the silence she left behind. It isn't empty. It's full of memory, of ghosts, of unspoken prayers. You realize that the greatest miracles are not the ones recorded in holy books, but the quiet transformations that happen in secret. A heart awakening, a mind opening, a soul daring to love what it was told to fear. The bells ring in your imagination one last time, clear, distant, eternal. You bow your head, not in worship but in gratitude. For the nuns who wrote and loved and healed in defiance of silence. For the generations who carried their wisdom into the world without even knowing. For the truth that beauty and desire are not enemies of holiness but its hidden form. You open your eyes to the morning. Light spills across the stones, golden and forgiving. The last silence becomes song. And as you walk away, you understand, the convent was never about walls. It was always about what survived them. And so, the candles burn low, the bells have fallen silent, and the cloister walls crumble into memory. But the echoes remain. Tonight, you've walked the long corridors of history, where faith met desire, where women wrote their secrets between the lines of scripture, where silence was both a prison and a kind of power. You've seen that holiness was never as simple as rules and vows. It was stitched with the same contradictions that still haunt the human heart. Behind every locked door, there was longing. Behind every vow, a choice. Behind every silence, a voice waiting to be heard. The story of the medieval nun isn't just a tale of piety or scandal, it's a mirror held up to all of us. It asks, what do we hide, and what do we love enough to risk everything for? Their world has vanished, yet their spirit lives on, in the artists who chase transcendence, the nurses who heal without recognition, the dreamers who find beauty in discipline, and in anyone who still believes that the sacred and the human are not opposites, but twins. So as you drift toward sleep, let the last chant fade softly in your mind. The veil is lifted, the secret told, and beneath it all, love endures. Good night, and thank you for wandering through history's quietest rebellion.